Hello and welcome back to the Science of Turning Back Time. I'm so pleased to have you here for episode 4, where we continue the journey into not just living longer, but living better. And if you've been with me from the beginning, you'll know that we've covered health span versus lifespan. We've spoken about the hidden dangers of ultra-processed foods. And in episode 3, we dove into the art of building lasting habits. But today we're talking about something fundamental, sleep. Now, if you're anything like me, sleep is something you know is important, but it's often the first thing that gets sacrificed when life gets busy. And the truth is, sleep is one of the most powerful tools we have to influence our health span. When we think about healthy aging, we often focus on diet, exercise, and stress management, but sleep doesn't always get the attention that it deserves. And yet, sleep is the cornerstone of all of these other aspects of health. It's the foundation that holds everything else up. And what I notice, and many of my patients will say as well, is when you've slept well, you have the discipline to do all the things you need to do. When you haven't slept well, that discipline often goes. Now, poor sleep doesn't just make us feel groggy. It has real, measurable impacts on our health. The studies have shown that consistently getting less than 6 hours of sleep per night increases the risk of developing chronic conditions like type 2 diabetes, cardiovascular disease, obesity, and dementia. And these changes are quite significant. So during our sleep, our bodies engage in very critical processes. And the first is repairing cells. So during sleep, damaged cells are repaired, toxins are flushed out, including from the brain through what's called the lymphatic system. It always sounds so glam, but it is the lymphatic system in the brain. It kind of flushes out and does a bit of housekeeping when we sleep. And hormone regulation. Now, sleep influences hormones like insulin, cortisol, and leptin, which control appetite and stress. And not sleeping enough massively dysregulates these hormones. And then, of course, memory consolidation. So the brain processes and stores information, which is why sleep is so closely linked to cognitive function. I always think of it during the night. It's like there's a lot of filing going on and things being consolidated and put into the right processes and places in the brain. And then in the physical body, it's kind of like a factory that runs 24/7 that has got scheduled maintenance times where the factory kind of closes down little bits and of its function for repair and maintenance to make sure that everything is functioning as best as it can. But sleep is not a passive state. It's a highly active time where our bodies and our brains are repairing. There are 2 main types of sleep. One is your REM, which is your rapid eye movement sleep, and the other is non-REM sleep. So we have 3 stages of sleep. The first is your light sleep, and this is where your body begins to relax. It's easy to wake up from this stage. In the deep sleep time, or sometimes called slow wave sleep, this is where most of the physical restoration occurs. So here the body is actively repairing tissues, building bone and muscle, strengthening the immune system, kind of recovering from the things we did during the day. Now, especially if you're doing a fair amount of exercise as well, this is the time the body's going to go in, kind of rebuilding all the muscles and the bones and things like that. And then we have our REM sleep. This is when dreaming occurs. And REM sleep is very crucial for brain function, like memory and emotional regulation. So to maximize our health span, we need a good balance of these sleep stages. But unfortunately, our modern day lives really can disrupt this balance. Everything from stress, screen time to late night eating, inconsistent schedules can interfere with our natural sleep rhythms. So one very fascinating aspect of sleep involves the relationship between the hormone serotonin and melatonin. So most of us will know serotonin. It's the feel-good hormone that's not only essential for mood regulation, but that serves as a precursor to melatonin, the hormone that regulates our sleep-wake cycles. And this is where it gets interesting. Exposure to natural light early in the day helps boost serotonin production. So when we get sunlight in the morning, particularly through our eyes, it sets up a whole cascade of hormonal responses. The serotonin that gets produced during the day is then converted to melatonin in the evening as light levels begin to drop. And this natural cycle is why getting outside in the morning, even just for 10 to 15 minutes, can significantly improve sleep quality. Now, I live in Scotland. Most of my patients live in Scotland, where, that morning sun is sometimes quite difficult to get in winter as well. But I encourage people, even if you take kind of a tea break in the morning, get out and get some of that sunlight earlier on in the day. Because when we disrupt this natural rhythm, say by spending all day indoors or exposing ourselves to artificial light late at night, it can interfere with melatonin production. And this is also why screen time before bed can be so problematic. So the blue light emitted by screens tricks our brains into thinking it's still daytime and suppressing melatonin and delaying the sleep onset. So you'll see sometimes people wear blue light blocking glasses. You can also get some setting on some of your devices. But generally, I would say trying to stay off devices in the evening as much as possible. I often get asked about melatonin supplements, and they can be a helpful tool, especially for short-term use. They're especially useful when adjusting to a new time zone or managing shift work or overcoming a temporary bout of insomnia. However, melatonin is a hormone. We don't want to use it long-term because it can sometimes disrupt the body's natural rhythms. It is still your best option rather than using kind of synthetic or over-the-counter sleeping pills. But instead of relying on melatonin regularly, it's often more effective to support the body's natural melatonin production. And this can be achieved by a consistent sleep schedule, reducing your evening light exposure, optimizing serotonin levels through natural light exposure during the day. You can also look at, there are some lovely little alarm clocks that start creating some light first thing in the morning to wake you up to a natural light, like the Lumi clocks. I really love those. So I have to admit, sleep hasn't always been my strong suit. For many years, I thought I could get on with about 7 hours of sleep. And then relying on coffee and sheer willpower to push through. But as I began to explore the science of aging, I realized just how much I was sabotaging my own health span. When I started tracking my sleep, I have an Oura ring. I found that while I was in bed for 7 to 8 hours, I was only getting about 4 hours of quality sleep. So I was waking up more often than I realized, and my REM sleep was quite minimal. And interestingly enough, I also noticed quite significant disruptions in my sleep patterns when I had alcohol, even a single glass of wine. So alcohol might help you fall asleep faster, but it seriously impacts the quality of your sleep, particularly reducing REM sleep. I also find in my patients who wear trackable devices measuring sleep, and they all say the same thing. Alcohol does have a very significant impact on the quality of sleep. For me as well, I find that late night working or screen time had a similar effect. I think it's both the kind of blue light coming in, but even more so it's that stimulation on the nervous system. So making it a lot harder to wind down at night and kind of adding to fragmented sleep. So I'm quite careful now. I start my kind of winding down already around 8 o'clock. So no screens, really just keeping lighting quite low in the home. I read books, and this is a really interesting thing because often people will say, well, I lead such a busy life. I have a lot of work. I can't afford to start a wind down that early. But when you do and you have a better quality of sleep, you're so much more productive that you can pack a lot more work into a kind of tighter time schedule. So hormones, they play a massive role in sleep quality as well, and particularly evident for many of my patients during perimenopause. This is when these fluctuating hormones can really lead to restlessness, difficulty staying asleep, and sometimes night sweats as well. But I always say, keep in mind that sleep isn't just about what you do right before bed. It's about managing your overall lifestyle and hormone balance, because, getting all of these things sorted can have a big impact on the quality of sleep. Well, I hope today's episode has inspired you to take a closer look at your sleep habits. Improving your sleep might be the simplest yet most powerful change you can make to support your health span. So I wanted to touch on the differences between primary and secondary insomnia. Your primary insomnia is when people have difficulties falling asleep, and usually there's no clear external cause. So we're thinking here more about stress and circadian rhythms, whereas secondary insomnia, whereby people fall asleep easily but then wake later, it's often caused by issues around pain or gut issues. Often you would start thinking of the adrenal glands or hormonal imbalances. So typically I would say primary insomnia would be from screen. Typically primary insomnia would be from stress and screen exposure before bed. Secondary insomnia can be due to things like perimenopause, gut dysfunction, chronic pain. And there are different patterns here, but those are kind of the general ones we tend to see. So what to think about if you've got primary insomnia, in other words, you're having difficulty getting to sleep at night, your sleep hygiene becomes really important. Things like screen time, but also thinking a little bit about what your stress levels are like, anxiety levels are like, and focusing on kind of being able to really regulate yourself before sleep. For primary insomnia, morning light exposure can also be really, really helpful. 10 to 15 minutes of sunlight in the morning can reset your melatonin. Of course, if you're living in areas where there's very low light, that can be a little bit more difficult as well. And definitely a tech detox before bed. Tons and tons of studies. There's a really great one that was done by Harvard University in 2014 that found that blue light suppresses melatonin by 50%. That's the light coming from your screens. Thinking about mindfulness and relaxation. So here we're thinking about things like deep breathing, yoga, meditation, all the things to lower your level of cortisol hormone at night. And again, if it's primary insomnia, you can be thinking of supplements like apigenin is quite helpful, just as a kind of a generally bringing the body's stress response down, like magnesium threonate for calming the nervous system, phosphatidylserine to help lower cortisol before sleep. It's a little bit more complicated with secondary insomnia. So this is the type of pattern where you're waking up in the night. You really have to try and unearth the underlying causes. Is there an issue around gut health? Inflammation is a big driver for secondary insomnia. Think also about meal timings. If you're eating a little bit too close to bedtime, that can really have a big impact on so that your digestive system is working really hard at night, as well as things like blood sugar instability. I love acupuncture for sleep regulation. There was a great study in 2019 in Medicine Review that found acupuncture improves sleep latency and your deep sleep quality. So, it's one of my favorite ways to really help with insomnia. For secondary insomnia, we start thinking of things like L-theanine can help with issues around adrenal function. Again, magnesium threonate working both primary and secondary insomnia, and then your adrenal adaptogens can be really helpful here. So, things like ashwagandha and rhodiola. So these are often quite helpful. They're not always constitutionally right for everyone, but it can be quite helpful. Chinese acupuncture and Chinese medicine has got a lot of research and really interesting strategies towards dealing with insomnia, especially around melatonin release and nervous system balance as well. So there are some good studies that show that acupuncture improves insomnia severity scores 90% of cases. And that was published in Sleep Medicine in 2019. That is a huge number. To find something that is going to have such a very big impact on sleep is massively significant. I'm an acupuncturist myself. I did my acupuncture training about 25 years ago out in Asia, both in Singapore and China, and have just found that it is one of the probably the most effective ways to treat, to treat insomnia that's really, really, really stubborn. And I think the way in which acupuncture works is by really addressing some of the underlying things that could be creating this sleep disturbance. And we've spoken about circadian rhythms and morning sunlight. But again, morning sunlight is probably one of the most simplest and effective sleep hacks. If you're living in areas where there is not a lot of lighting, especially in the winter months, even your artificial lighting is better than no lighting. But, think about getting a sad lamp as well, just to get that morning light as well. Because as we said earlier, sunlight boosts the production of serotonin, which then converts to melatonin at night. And then, of course, you're dimming your lights at night. Try and reduce your artificial blue light in the evenings as well. So just to summarize, our sleep is critical for longevity. It's critical for brain health. It's critical for all processes, because this is when the body is doing its repair work. So, a big focus on sleep is one of the things that I find has got the biggest impact on reducing biological aging. And, trying to think about using natural supplements and acupuncture instead of relying on sleep medications. And then often small lifestyle changes like screen time reduction and stress management can dramatically improve your sleep quality. So I'm curious to know, what's the first change you'll make after hearing this episode?